Good evening. Today is November 4. It's about 6 p.m. And this is the Streets and Sidewalks Committee. To my left is Councilman Brock Heath, and to my right is Councilman Bill Lutz, and I'm Bob Phillips, the chair. We are here this afternoon to have a little discussion about a modification to an ordinance relating to sidewalk repair, clean, free from obstructions and other prohibitions related to snow being placed on sidewalks and in the street and other items. And I have been told that our estimable...
I don't think that's a word.
Esteemed? She's esteemed and estimable. Jillian Rhodes is going to lead the discussion on this.
Good evening, gentlemen. So yeah, we're just here to talk about, several years ago when I started with the city of Troy, we weren't enforcing due to lack of regulation as much as we should be regarding bundled brush and grass clippings and things like that in the street. So over the last few years, we've started to tell people, send letters out, you know, when they're not bundling it, anything like that, that they need to be, or they need to be putting it in the bags. And so this kind of just goes in line with that kind of discussion. Then, as I was talking to Jerry, the street foreman, when we start talking about snow and things like that in the winter season, it really is a nuisance, a problem that we start talking about. Everybody's blowing their snow into the street, whether it be from their driveway or from their sidewalks. I shouldn't say everybody, that's really a generalization, but there are a large number of people blowing their snow into the street, which then causes issues. Obviously, causes issues, takes us additional manpower and hours if we're going to go back out there and plow it again, because after we've plowed it, it looks as if essentially the street department hasn't touched it. So, so in modifying 52106 and talking about keeping sidewalks in repair and clean, and then talking about adding also street, talking about snow, and talking about non-leaf season, obviously leaves, and talking about keeping the street clear as well as keeping the gutters cleared. So talking about non-leaf season when we require it to be bagged. So that is what we're asking council to recommend, or this committee to recommend to council.
So you're indicating that we have had issues, and I guess, Mr. Mullins, could you possibly address that better as to what you're finding in your rounds and what the practicality that you're encountering there?
Right.
With the equipment that we have?
Normally what we run into in the summer season, fall season, when people are mowing, is they'll mow their grass out into the street, and obviously if it rains it can just wash right down into the gutter. The main problem I've had in the wintertime is we'll plow a street, it'll be down to black, it'll be, you know, wet, and I'll go home. Just in my neighborhood alone, I use Shaftesbury as a reference, and several people will blow their snow off the sidewalks out into the road, and it gets drove on and gets packed in, and then it almost looks like the road hasn't been plowed. We've actually had citizens who've done that call us and say, hey, our road needs salted again. Well, it wouldn't if we hadn't blown all the snow out into the road. It would have stayed like it was. So normally what I'll do is I'll stop and I'll ask them, you know, politely to stop, and that usually doesn't go well. It's happened quite a few times. I've even had neighbors call me to complain that someone's blowing their sidewalks into the street. So it creates a hazard, and it does make it look like the city's not responding to a snowstorm. If we plow the road and someone who doesn't live on that road drives down it, probably thinks, wow, I wonder why this road wasn't done. It's especially problematic on the cul-de-sacs, of which we have several. I don't know if anybody here lives on a cul-de-sac. No, the mayor does. It's especially problematic on cul-de-sacs when people do that, because it gets into the middle of the cul-de-sac, and you know, it takes a ton of salt to get that stuff melted down, because it doesn't get drove on, so it takes a while. So it's very problematic during the winter time. We have curbed a lot of the for the lawn companies who were really bad at it, but we've been able to slow them down quite a bit on it. So really now we're just worried about people privately blowing their grass and their and there's snow out into the street. The lawn companies have kind of got the message, and with the help of the police, and I don't know really if they had anything they could really cite them for, but just the police showing up usually stops it.
Can you speak to any number off of the top of your head, what this may be costing us in additional staffing time in order to correct any of these things?
As far as the grass goes, probably not, other than the fact that, we're contracted out for somebody sweeping. So that's extra weight that's going on that vehicle. When he goes out to dump, he's getting grass and debris in his sweeper, so it could add up to weight for that. It was the reason we went to the tea bag or yard waste bag scenario where anything loose has to be in a bag, because that cuts down on the amount of money we're spending to throw stuff away that really is biodegradable and shouldn't be going to the dump in the first place. I think we all know how much salt and the time is for salting, so when you go out and you get a road black, you really hate for it not to stay that way because of something man-made. Now, if it snows again, that's another story, but it's quite expensive to salt the road one time, much less have to go out and do it again, simply because we haven't took the time to blow the snow into our yards. I mean, I live in an area where when I do my sidewalks, I blow it into the yard. My neighbors do blow it in the yard, but you have several people who just blow it out into the road and they don't think it's that big of a deal, and it can cause a problem. Money-wise, yeah, I really probably couldn't put a number on it, but it's quite expensive to go out and resalt.
Okay. Don't go away, because I'm assuming these two and maybe a couple of more are going to want to have some questions here. So, gentlemen, questions of Mr. Mullen at this time?
I don't know if I have any questions specifically for Mr. Mullen, other than if I'm a downtown business owner, and I get snow on my sidewalk, where am I supposed to put it?
We usually try to get downtown to clean up the sidewalks with the parking stalls down there. You really don't have much of a choice but to just shovel it off into the parking area, and then eventually we can get downtown and we can clean it up. There's really not much of another choice you can. Most of the business owners don't chuck it out into the road. They'll just kind of pile up that little berm along the edge. Because when we plow, especially plowing the main drags, there will be some snow left off the last plow of that tandem plow crew that builds up along the curb. The business owners put it in there. I think we've shown eventually we come uptown and we'll be able to scrape all that off and clean it up. The business owners really keeping it out in front of their house, in front of their door. Basically, all they can really do is scoot it to the road. There's really not much choice they have.
So with the proposed ordinance that's written, if I'm a downtown business owner, I have to be in conflict with the ordinance.
If we're saying that the downtown business owners, that's the only place they can put it in, and we're asking people not to put it in the road, then yes. You would be if you put it in the road, but I'm saying they can scoot it right out to the edge of the sidewalk. They don't have necessarily.
Well, I'm still in conflict with the ordinance because I got to keep my sidewalk clean.
Right.
Okay.
No, yeah, yes and no. I mean, if you look at the downtown sidewalks, you've got concrete from the building out towards the road. Then you have 5-6 feet of brick pavers, if not more. Then you've got another section of concrete. Then you have the curb. Typically, what the business owners do is they will put it between the curb and the brick pavers. So call that a concrete tree lawn, if you will, like a residential. For the most part, that's what people do. They're not, we don't have snow blowers downtown typically that are being used by the businesses. They're shoveling in front of their storefronts and they're just pushing it out towards the edge.
So will the individual or individuals who are responsible for enforcing this ordinance section understand that?
Yes.
Because you're saying then that there's not much change there's no change actually from the current activity that the business owners do downtown to post if this thing went into effect today.
Correct.
We don't
Because
necessarily.
they're not blowing it into the street.
Right.
I'm just curious, how many business owners do we think know that the area in between the pavers and the street is a concrete tree lawn as you described it?
I'm not sure what your question is, Mr.
Well, and my
Lawrence.
question,
I mean,
This is-
all I can do
I
is go
will-
from practice and what we've seen
Okay.
over the last
I
decades.
I will
and-
pontificate on this,
Okay.
if I might. It appears that this is a solution in search of a problem. If we spent more time and effort educating residents that we don't want grass in the street and how to properly dispose of their snow, I wonder if that's not a better avenue to take to solve our problems than to bring in a punitive measure as such as being proposed.
Well, just understand, when they're told in person by me, that it doesn't go well, they're rude to me. They're not going to, that person isn't gonna listen to someone who's suggesting they do something. 'Cause I'm right there with them while they're doing it, and I pull up and ask them to stop, and they won't. So that person's probably not gonna respond to some document or pseudo kind of idea that, hey, we'd just like for you guys to listen.
I completely understand that, but I'm trying to think, when was the last time that the city made a concerted effort to tell people not to put grass clippings in their street?
Mr. Lutz, every season prior to the spring, also prior to the snow, when we send out a press release, we always include that information. We always do.
And like Mrs. Rhodes says, back in 13, 14, whenever that was, it was lamented, hey, we don't do that. That's the reason we have yard waste bags. And we still have people today who still, even with the yard waste program, which is there for that, who still choose to blow it into the street.
The city's recently hired a new communications coordinator. Would it make sense to have this communications coordinator try out something where she can help spread the word about these issues so that we make more friends than we do enemies? I mean, I live in a part of town where I'm lucky if I get my neighbors to mow their grass. I know they're not worried about grass clippings in the street. If we could do something with outreach to the schools, more social media posts, pictures of this is where your snow needs to go, those types of things. If we put forward that type of effort and then we say, you know what, it's just not working, okay, then maybe we look at this. But I mean, to put something in a press release that we don't even know if people are going to read it in the newspaper, I think we make more friends by trying to explain our story rather than coming up with punitive measures.
So I guess the only thing I would add, Mr. Lutz, is when we do a press release, we're doing it to all of our social media as well as the media. So it's not as if they're doing a newspaper. If you've got any other ideas as to how we can do other outreach, we're doing everything right now. I'm not sure what else we can do.
Well, maybe when it snows, Patrick could go out with a snow shovel and say, hey, here's the place downtown where you can put your snow. Or, it's things like that that I'm not trying to be belligerent. I'm really not. I just feel that, if a measure like this has the effect of creating more animosity where animosity does not need to be created. And if we do a better job of educating our residents, and again, I don't know exactly what that looks like, we may end up doing more benefit to ourselves than harm in the long run.
Committee first.
Yep, absolutely. So I think it just depends on the delivery of it. I don't think we need to come across as big bad city telling you where you can't put your snow. Just, hey, we're trying to protect everybody. This stuff gets slippery when you shoot it out there. Grass clippings are bad for bikers when they scoot by and they can hit things wrong. So I think we're protecting people. We're not coming down as the man on top of people. We're trying to protect people from getting hurt.
We're more interested in asking questions here and getting
The,
information instead of.
Yeah, so what's the process? So the police officer drives by, sees this guy doing it, he calls it in, and then they get a letter and a fine? Or what's the process, I guess, after that?
I'm not, yes, I think what the process would be is that they would get a letter giving
Yep.
them the notification, and then there'll be a certain amount of time, and then we would go forward with a misdemeanor if they don't correct the action, essentially.
Okay, so you get a warning letter first anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
And I also think, just to, I mean, Bill, I heard what you said, but I don't believe that our downtown businesses is really, I don't think that they're an issue right now. We don't foresee them to be an issue, and so it's really more so that we're looking more at the residential neighborhoods and the streets that we're hitting, that we hit once, we get them down to black, as Jerry made the mention, and then there's been numerous times, I don't necessarily go out and drive the street when there is a snowstorm. I'm normally in the office doing other things, but when I do go out there, numerous times I've called Jerry and said, I thought you said we got this street. And he's like, we did. And then you do look in the driveways and the sidewalks, and you do see a lot of sidewalks that are cleared. So we appreciate everybody clearing their sidewalks. Like you said, we're not trying to be big, bad people. We're just trying to keep people as safe as possible at all times. And so just to have some kind of avenue, some kind of a little bit better defined process to be able to make those people be held accountable is what we're looking for.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, I believe you had a question.
Well, more of a point of clarification or of understanding, and I think Jerry could attend to this, but every week we have a radio show, and in the fall in particular, we talk about the process of helping the community and keeping it safe, as Brock said, by how you go about keeping the storm sewers open. You pile the leaves, you separate the twigs from, and we have done that for years, correct, Jerry? I mean, we have done an actual, you mentioned the hands-on, where even the mayor has gone out and raked, and I'm talking about the fall season right now, but even in the winter season, maybe a point of clarification. I think the abuse is when the people just blow the grass clippings into the middle of the street, or they blow the snow in the middle of the street, which covers. But most people that I have seen will pile it and do the right thing. They will pile the snow up for snow removal in the wintertime and not just blow it out, but pile it. And the same thing for the leaves. We've encouraged people to put their leaves in a pile, separate the twigs and branches, and keep a storm sewer lane for drainage purposes. And I think we have done a really good job of that. We've done video with it. We've done radio shows with the proper procedure. I think where we get a little hung up is maybe somewhat of an abuse, where people do cut their grass and they don't put it in the well, we shouldn't say tea bag, any biodegradable bag now, which has been nice, and they just blow it out in the middle of the street thinking, and for a safety issue, when it rains, that becomes a danger. And the same thing with leaves. Blowing the leaves out in the middle of the street makes sometimes neighbors unhappy because the wind blows them into other yards. I just think, point of clarification on that, am I right, Jerry? Most of the things that I think are being discussed right now are more when somebody doesn't try to put them in a bag, or doesn't try to pile it up so it can be removed in one big lump. It's when it was just blowing out into the street, both snow and grass clippings and leaves.
Gotcha.
I just think a point of clarification is we have tried to do some education with that.
Any other questions, comments? Mrs. Baker?
My concern has to do with Part A, and then as it's written. Part B and C are quite clear. But Part A, the way that's worded, is that no owner or occupant of abutting lands shall fail to keep the sidewalks, curbs, or gutters in repair and free from snow, ice, or any nuisance. And in my experience, I understand the Part B and C where you're telling people not to blow their snow out into the street. But there are times when the snow plows come through and can't get that snow all the way to the curb. perhaps cars are parked along the curb line or whatever, and they have to plow around them. I guess it's unclear to me if it's my responsibility to go out and shovel that heavy snow, that the snowplow has plowed against the curb lawn, or curb line, to clear that out. And also as far as curbs and gutters in repair, that's kind of ambiguous. What do we mean by the word repair? Are we supposed to go out and, when there's chunks of curb broken away, are we supposed to go out in the neighborhoods and repair that? Or, do you wait until the streets are redone? At what point is that my responsibility? So it's part A that I had a concern about. And I don't know if Mr. Kerber's the one to address that, or if it's, who would be the best to address that,
I
but
think Mrs. Rhodes actually.
That part wasn't changed, that's correct.
I understand that, but if we're changing, if we're making it more clear,
And it's
then I'm wondering.
verbatim from the ORC. That's verbatim from the Ohio Revised Code.
Okay, so we're required to use that terminology.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
can you, Mrs. Rhodes, can you identify or address the responsibilities as she's laid out there to the private property owner?
Yeah, so when you talk about snow, although the street department, we attempt in every way, shape, or form to not shove it right back, that's what happens. It is what happens, and unfortunately, it does kind of fall to the property owners to do that. So we try to get out there as early as possible to clear it before property owners do start clearing their stuff. And then when you talk about curbs and gutters and when to repair them, it is, as you can see from ORC 723.011, that it is the property owner's responsibility for curbs and gutters. That being said, that it isn't odd that if a truck drives by and takes out a chunk, when people do call in, Jerry goes out, does kind of an investigation, and we do repair those if we find, that's completely logical, that we were there, we plowed this, it happened, But if it's in complete disrepair due to age and it's crumbling, it is the property owner's responsibility, and whenever somebody does call into the engineering department to discuss that, that's what I kind of walk through with them. When you talk about timing of it, it's up to the property owner. We don't, at this point, the city doesn't have a curb repair program. It's always been my vision to assist with some kind of or start, but at this point, there's nothing in the books of any curb repair program that's going to occur in the next 3 to 5 years.
So residents wouldn't be charged with a misdemeanor then if it's a curb issue?
Correct, and we don't really, the curb issue, again, it does state it in here, but right now, we don't go out and find curb issues to point out to anybody, no.
Thank you.
I have a question. What kind of impact does this have on the stormwater drainage system?
Well, I guess I go back to, I think Mr. Phillips, you're the one who asked the question about the costs. It is difficult to enumerate the costs, but, one of the significant costs that we have in the stormwater system is our back truck. I think we're almost due to have one replaced or start looking at a second one, and I believe that they are in the $400,000 to $500,000 range to purchase a new one. So they're not cheap. We are using them more and more. The grass does get in them and will accumulate over time depending on what else gets into them between gravel and sticks and brush. So it can be a problem. That is one of the issues, one of our stormwater management initiatives. I'd have to look at the literature that we send. We do have a requirement to educate constantly about the stormwater, our stormwater management plan, and I believe that is one area that we do try to focus on, is keeping stuff out of the gutters to keep the stormwater plan, or keep the stormwater system as free of debris as possible. Some of our stormwater piping is undersized, especially as we grow. And so when we do get one of those 100-year rain events, that's when we get the complaints, and we try to go out on an emergency basis and clear the catch basins and clear the grates as quickly as possible. So this only exacerbates that problem in those extreme events.
If people dump their, and I've seen where bags of grass have been dumped on the street, and they just wait for the city to pick it up. They also cover it, some people cover it with leaves. If the leaf truck comes along and you have a pile of leaves with a pile of grass underneath it, what do you do?
We usually pick them up because a lot of people mow them and put them in a bag, and they're kind of mulched with the grass, and they put that out there. And we've never said anything about that during leaf season. Only leaf season will we allow loose grass. If it's loose out there, I'll stop, knock on the door. If I can't get them to understand, I'll get Robert or Brent Shannon involved.
And so this came about because I'm aware of this issue. So I asked Patrick, I've seen other cities enacting legislation like this. And I said, do we have anything like this? How do we deal with this? No, we don't have a mechanism in place. And I said, well, create a mechanism. So here we go. My thought is, I'm glad we're having the discussion. I think the discussion needs to be had. I think the purpose of legislation is a little bit premature. I'd really like to see us maybe this year do a real push towards education of what people can and can't do with their grass and snow. And with the thought that maybe next season we would enact something where they could be ticketed and fined. But I feel like doing legislation before we do a push on education is maybe a little premature. Personal thought.
Mr. Seaver, you were about to get up. I knew that you had a need to come.
No, I
address
really
us.
did. Actually, Ms. Oda just kind of took the thunder out of what I was going to say. Look, this is Strother Martin, right? This is what we have here is failure to communicate. And what we need to do, I agree with Ms. Oda. I would personally, I think the snow blowing absolutely needs to, that is a problem. I see that on the streets. I think the grass, you're looking at arbitrariness. What's the difference between a leaf? What if I throw my sticks out there, my acorns out there? You know, the leaves are falling from the trees. I think there's lots of problems with the grass. We have a system in place that you're supposed to put your grass in the bags and have it be picked up. Before you criminalize that conduct, I think it's really important to communicate that we're going to want you to follow the programs that are in existence. And so I agree with, I think it's premature to do legislation. I think we need to work a little bit on the legislation to assume that it can be enforceable. What I've read appears to be a little arbitrary. I'm not saying that in deference to Grant, but I think it would be hard to enforce what you're doing, when you're doing it. You know, why is the grass being, are you intentionally blowing out there? Are you blowing out there with a leaf blower, or is it being discharged from a side-mounted lawnmower? Is that going to be a distinction? Is it, I mean, there's just lots of issues with that. So I was glad to hear what Robin just said, and so that's all I was really going to say.
All right, thank you.
And I will say, my whole point of bringing this issue up was to have a discussion. We're not allowed to have discussions outside of this chambers. So I'm glad for the legislation. It gives us a jumping off point for discussion. And here we are. And I think we can do more discussion. So Patrick or Grant, I'm not sure who to ask. Bobby, if we want to continue discussing this, how do we get back together and discuss this again legally?
I
Have a
think you would
continuation
schedule
of committee.
another committee meeting, but I think in the meantime, it sounds like we have two different issues, which we do. One relates to snow, which is coming up, and the other relates to the grass, which is not going to be an issue until,
Next summer.
God help us, 4 months, probably more like 8 months from now. So, I don't know at what point and what the timing is of getting back together.
Can we work on an education program and just really do a push on how to handle snow for this winter?
Sure.
And just really define and really put out there what we need people to do to help the city?
And we're thinking social media,
Have Lauren
Yeah.
work on
yeah.
some kind of a presentation?
On the flip side of this, I will make another comment that is, to Mr. Mullins' point, when he goes out and talks to someone, and believe me, this is from the heart, one of the nicest guys in the world that can get people to do almost anything he wants to do. However, we do have stubborn folks sometimes that need a little bit more encouragement and the more of a legal hammer, if you will. So having something to back up just going out and being the Mr. Nice Guy and then somebody just slapping you in the face and doing what they want to in the meantime, that follow through and the ability to enforce something, our wishes and our wants and conformance and that sort of thing, we're not considering that, and that's what this provides going down the road. So that's another thought that comes behind this. Are there any more questions of staff from the audience or any other council folks?
I just have a little quick question that I just asked Grant, but I think it's important you guys all hear. Under the existing Section A, which Ms. Baker just referenced, I think he thinks possibly we can still send out the letter on enforceability when it comes to snow. So if you're blowing your snow in, we don't know that it's going to be deemed, is that fair? I don't want to misquote what I just had my conversation with Grant about.
I misunderstood your question. No, I mean, as part of the education process, certainly the city can send out letters saying, look, this is an issue with the snow and things like that. We could send something out to a property owner that was sending something out, or the grass clippings or something like that. I think the best way to, if we were wanting to have some sort of teeth to it, would be to make a change on that. I think that would be the best way to do it. But if there's going to be like a year or a certain period of time to go ahead and look at this, and for the education, we certainly can, advise them or educate however you think best.
But at the moment, we don't have much teeth in the existing ordinance that we have.
I'm concerned how it's written. It doesn't reference snow or grass, and I think for a couple of different reasons. One, there certainly could be a challenge that it's vague and it doesn't really cover snow and grass clippings. But also, I think we do a service to the citizens to make sure that expectations are set forth. And that's why it would be recommended if council chose to do that it would explicitly state, snow and grass clippings.
Gotcha.
I guess one thing I would ask to clarify, in the current code, it does mention snow and ice. It only mentions, though, to the curb and the gutter.
Right.
It does not mention into the street, which is where our problem is with snow. It's correct, there's nothing in here that talks about grass or other debris.
Correct. Thank you.
I guess, how do you define the curb other than up to the street? Wouldn't the curb be the street where your curb is?
Well, and again, that sort of goes back to, I think the intent was to make sure that the expectations were clear to, because if it says curb and gutter, a homeowner could say, well, it's in the street, it's not the curb or the gutter. It's, I think, and we've had, not on this topic, but certain challenges to other city ordinances. The reviewing courts always like it to be in black and white out there, and that was the thought.
Here's my question, Grant, what I'm trying to ask. Do you?
Mr. Eber, could you step up to the microphone, please?
I guess, Mr. Kerber, here's what I'm trying to reconcile in my mind. Do you think that the language that says the curb, if Jerry Mullins sees somebody blowing snow out into the street, that he can come back and the city could write a letter that says, hey, we're not gonna charge you right now, but we want you to know that there is a statute in place that may affect this and that you should stop? Or do you think we need to change legislation now so that we can write that letter? Because I think that's kind of what we're trying, that's sort of the debate right now, is where are we on enforceability of this? Or if council even wants to enforce it, but that's the question that I need an answer for.
Well, and I guess there is no question that the city can notify people that any practice that a homeowner is doing that's endangering the public as far as putting ice out in the street or grass clippings on the street, we can send them a letter and ask them to stop. I don't think it would be appropriate to threaten criminal prosecution when it's not more clear that that's the case.
But you're saying that the rewrite or the additional language in the proposal, that clarifies that?
That was the intent, yes.
Okay. Does anyone on the committee have a question about the clarity of the language that's written here?
I guess I do.
Okay, please.
So I don't know what the downside of passing this is. I think people are scared we're going to make people mad or something. The people that are doing this, they need to be educated, so we can do some kind of a combination where, okay, they're getting a letter out first, they're being educated. I don't know if we need a citywide education for this because most of the city's not doing this. So I think if we pass this, it gives a little bit of repercussion for people that are just being belligerent, because unfortunately, most people are great, but some people are literally, because Jerry's walked up to them, now they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to pour it out there every single time because this guy told me I'm not supposed to. So to have this backing, I think would make sense if for in those cases. But the education side totally makes sense. Why can't we do an education, and then if you keep taking it to the extreme, now we've got this repercussion. If we don't pass this, then we can educate and educate and educate, and they just keep doing it, and there's no repercussion at all, nobody cares. So I don't know what the downside of having this final catch is.
Gotcha. Mr. Lutz?
You know, I would entertain adopting the proposed language if Section C was cut out. Let's see if we're really going to enforce this resolution during the winter season. And if we find out that, yes, we do have a problem in which this ordinance has solved, we can address Section C 6 months from now, or whatever time period that we deem appropriate.
And I know that we will have a new initiative in the spring, or a refined initiative in the spring, to do a spring cleanup month. I don't know how long we were going to take it, but during that time, we can do that push on the yard waste issue and see how well that works, as well as other periodic educational pieces.
I'm sorry,
So in the spring, we're going to be crafting a program where we have a kind of a spring, community-wide spring cleanup. We already do a week-long event.
Right.
We found that that's really not long enough. So since that's the beginning of the season, since that's when grass season is starting, then at the same time, if we don't adopt anything, if we don't adopt C here, we can spend the time educating in earnest and see how well that goes during next growing season.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions that need to come from the audience? Okay. So the proposal is here in writing. Mr. Lutz has suggested, and in fact, you could put that in the form of a motion to remove that section from this proposal, if you wished.
I move to adopt or recommend approval of adopting 52106, all sections with the exception of Section C.
Okay. Is there a second to that?
Yeah, with the understanding we'll revisit the other things in the spring. I'll second that.
Okay, so the motion is made and seconded to remove subsection C in the recommended 521.06 ordinance. Any other questions, items, or discussion? And, I'm sorry, all in favor of that motion?
Aye.
The motion carries. And your suggestion on the rest of the ordinances proceed as written and amended?
Correct.
Good.
AD&D.
Then it is the decision of the committee to move forward with 521.06 as staff has recommended with removing subsection C at this point.
We are not asking for emergency.
Excellent. Any other items to come before the Streets and Sidewalks Committee?
No, sir.
Okay, then we are